Yesterday's prophecies, today's headlines. This is the Hal Lindsey Report. And now, Hal Lindsey.
Good evening and welcome to this edition of the Hal Lindsey Report. The Orlando Massacre will change your life. Certain acts of terrorism have that effect. This one is one of them. Airports, concert venues, and theme parks are all much different places than they were when the century began. Each of the changes came in response to terror attacks. This one will be like that. To understand one of the ways your life will change, look at what's being blamed for the terror attack. It's not the shooter or the ideology that drove him, Islam. It's the tool he used. That means guns. Guns are being blamed for the death of 49 people at the nightclub, as if Omar Mateen's gun showed up alone and killed those people. The most prominent gun control measure now being proposed sounds reasonable at first. To not allow anyone on the government's no-fly list to purchase a gun. The logic is as if they're too dangerous to ride on commercial airlines, they're too dangerous to own a gun. Simple. At least it seems simple until you think about it. If this law is enacted, it will allow a constitutional right to be taken away from any individual on the whim of a government bureaucrat. There would be no due process, no court order, no accountability, just a whim. The no-fly list is already an enigma. Consider this. The government is telling us that a person is too dangerous to be aboard an airline, but not a bus. They cannot fly with you, but they can live next door. They can shop with you. They can go inside a church or movie theater with you. If they are this dangerous in the air, what makes them less dangerous on the ground? There's no meaningful accountability with the no-fly list. The government refuses to say how many people are on the list or how they got there. A couple of years ago, leaked information suggested that the list contained about 47,000 names. If you make it do double duty as a no-gun list, you can expect that number to rise dramatically. It also suggested how you might wind up on the list. Perhaps you said something years ago that someone in the government thought was suspicious. Perhaps you publicly criticized the administration or irritated an official. Or maybe you expressed an opinion someone in authority just didn't like. Or it might be a clerical error. The late Senator Ted Kennedy was once on the no-fly list. The government said it was a simple mistake. But even with all his political power and fame, it still took 3 weeks to get him off that list. Fox News explained what can happen when an ordinary person gets on that list. A Stanford University doctoral student was placed on the no-fly list in 2004. After 7 years of federal lawsuits, it was determined she was unjustly put on the list because an FBI agent had checked the wrong box on a form. Quite a few people have been placed on the list because their names were similar to persons actually suspected of terrorism or terrorist sympathies. Since using the no-fly list for gun control would allow the government to take away a constitutional right without due process, what next? Will some bureaucrat or minor official put you on the list because you once gave money to the wrong political cause? Or maybe because your pastor once preached a sermon against same-sex marriage? Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, and most other Democrats are enthusiastically for this. Folks, at stake here is the preeminence of the Constitution in the American law. It is not just about the right to buy a semi-automatic weapon. It's not just about gun rights or the right to defend ourselves. It's about all our rights. The blame game following last week's Orlando terrorist attacks has been bizarre, to say the least. A New York Times editorial said, "Hate crimes don't happen in a vacuum. They occur where bigotry is allowed to fester, where minorities are vilified, and where people are scapegoated for political gain." Tragically, this is the state of American politics, driven too often by Republican politicians. In this case, when they say Republican, they mean people who hold traditional values, mostly Christians. But Omar Mateen was neither a Republican nor a Christian. He was a Democrat and a Muslim. President Obama implied that the shooting is the fault of Americans who believe homosexual behavior is a sin. He said, "We should pray that God give us the strength and courage to change." The New York Post's John Podhoretz responded, "That's just disgusting. There's no other word for it. America's national attitude toward LGBT people didn't shoot up the Pulse nightclub." If the president is intent on assigning blame, he could talk about the club patron who admitted on live television that he blocked a crucial exit from the club. The young man said, "We just started pushing, and then when we got the 10-second break, we went to this alleyway which led for only employees, and me and this random guy tried blocking their door. At that point, like I said, the bullets were getting louder and closer. So we blocked this door, and we did hear banging. I pray it wasn't anyone trying to escape, because I would forever feel guilty." Someone inside the club told what was happening on the other side of the door. 50 people were trying to jump over each other trying to exit the place. There was a guy holding the door and not letting us exit. He's like, stay inside. As he is saying that, the shooter keeps getting closer and closer, and the sound of the bullets is getting closer. Everyone starts to panic. People are getting trampled. Let us out. To keep themselves safe, they sacrifice the lives of others trying to escape. Blame? We could talk all day about blame. Senator John McCain sees a direct connection between the foreign policy of President Obama and the Orlando shooting. But in all the blaming, do not forget the man who pulled the trigger. And remember the ideology that led him there. A Gallup poll says that only 48% of Americans believe the Orlando Massacre was primarily an act of Islamic terrorism. I say only because this is such a blatant instance of Islamic terrorism. Mateen himself said he was doing it in the name of ISIS. During the massacre, he repeatedly shouted out, "Allahu Akbar." He was a regular on radical Islamic websites. From inside the nightclub, he tweeted that America should expect other terrorist acts in coming days. Despite all this, 41% of Americans do not see it as terrorism, but as gun violence. I lay the blame for this impression directly at the feet of the president and the cowardly, devious mainstream media. It also gives me the distinct impression that too many Americans are either incredibly naive or too lazy to think for themselves. I'll be right back. CIA Director John Brennan said last week, ISIL has a large cadre of Western fighters who could potentially serve as operatives for attacks in the West. and the group is probably exploring a variety of means for infiltrating operatives into the West, including refugee flows. The FBI has 10,000 terror investigations open at any given time. They're overwhelmed. So what does the administration do? They bring in more people from terror strongholds who cannot possibly be vetted. These are people that the CIA director says probably includes members of ISIS. If the Obama administration continues at its present pace, it will have allowed 1 million Muslims into the U.S. before the president's term ends next January. American Muslims are supposedly well assimilated, but a new poll from the Center for Security Policy found that 51% of those recent migrants agreed with this statement. Muslims in America should have the choice of being governed according to Sharia. Worse than that, 25% agreed that violence against Americans here in the United States can be justified as part of the global jihad. That's 25%? These are not Americans. These are, quote, refugees our president has invited into our country in the last couple of years. Meanwhile, the government is careful not to teach law enforcement agencies anything about the dangerous ideology flowing into the country. 3 times, the FBI detained the Orlando shooter for questioning, and 3 times they let him go. What's more, he actually worked for a company that works for Homeland Security. So they should have known more about him than they do about most Americans. But they did not put him on the no-fly list. There are a number of things they could have done to keep him from legally purchasing a gun, and they did nothing. That's because the FBI agents are not given accurate, honest instruction on radical Islam. In 2011, the Obama administration removed all mention of Islamic terror from FBI's counterterrorism training curriculum. Former FBI agent John Guandola told the Washington Free Beacon that the investigation into Mateen ended prematurely because FBI leadership has systematically refused to look at and teach Sharia to its agents because it is getting its advice on Islam from Muslims who are hostile to us and our system of government. One Muslim group working to keep U.S. law enforcement clueless about Islamic contention is CAIR, the Council on American Islamic Relations. In 2007, the U.S. Justice Department named CAIR an unindicted co-conspirator for providing funds to terrorist organizations. Nevertheless, the organization and its members have always been held in high regard by this administration. The White House turns to CAIR whenever it faces issues involving Muslims. For some reason, CAIR has extraordinary influence in Washington. It is funded by Saudi Arabia. CAIR works tirelessly to place material favorable to Islam in public school libraries. It also works to make certain U.S. textbooks never contain anything negative about Muslims or their ideology. And it is remarkably successful. The Investor's Business Daily recently discussed some disturbing statements by key Muslim leaders in America. Omar Ahmed is co-founder of CAIR. He said, "Islam isn't in America to be equal to any other faith, but to become dominant. The Quran should be the highest authority in America, and Islam the only accepted religion on earth. Replace the Constitution with the Quran? Allow no other religion anywhere on earth?" These are the people the president consults on how to deal with Islam. Muzammil Siddiqui serves as chairman of the North American Islamic Trust. That group owns most of the mosques in the United States. You don't get more mainstream than that. He said, as Muslims, we should participate in the system to safeguard our interests and try to bring gradual change. But we must not forget that Allah's rules have to be established in all lands, and all our efforts should lead in that direction. In other words, right now, Muslims should use U.S. law for their own protection. But the goal is to establish Sharia law in the U.S. and all nations. Folks, Islam is more bent on world domination than even the communists were. Imam Siraj Mahaj is the director of Muslim Alliance in North America. He said, in time, this so-called democracy will crumble and there will be nothing. And the only thing that will remain will be Islam. The motto of Zaytuna College is where Islam meets America. Imam Saeed Zakir co-founded that institution in Berkeley, California in 2008. He said, if we put a nationwide infrastructure in place and marshaled our resources, we'd take over this country in a very short time. What a great victory it will be for Islam to have this country in the fold and ranks of the Muslims. He also said, every Muslim who is honest would say, I would like to see America become a Muslim country. In contrast, Jesus told Christians to render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's. He also said, my kingdom is not of this world. But Muslims are determined to take over the world, either by persuasion, subterfuge, or force. Now hear this. The Quran teaches that its system of government should supersede all others. Those who take their Muslim faith seriously make it their goal to defeat and undermine any government that is not Sharia-based. A few weeks ago in Orlando, Muslim cleric Farouk Shikalashfar said that homosexuals should all be executed. He said, out of compassion, let's get rid of them now. Omar Mateen showed exactly the kind of Muslim compassion homosexuals can expect. He blasted away ruthlessly at them inside the nightclub. At a 2013 Islamic conference in Norway, Fahad Qureshi, the founder of Islam Net, said this, even moderate Muslims believe in the subjugation of women and the death penalty for homosexuals. Speaking at another conference on Islam, Qureshi said, these are generally views that every Muslim actually has. Every Muslim believes in these things. Qureshi asked the Muslim in attendance if they agreed with such things as gender segregations and stoning women for adultery. Almost every person in the room raised his hand. It is bigotry to criticize a person for his race. No one chooses his skin color, and we can all be happy with the way God made us. But we do have a choice when it comes to ideology. If we call it bigotry to criticize ideas, then the word bigotry loses all meaning. Islam is a set of ideas, very bad ideas, and we must have the right to vigorously criticize them. Religion is trouble. Secularists can rant and rave, but they will never be able to do as much damage as quickly as religionists. That may shock you coming from a Christian minister, but it's true. Because of the damage religion can do, God spent much of the Old Testament condemning the false religious leaders of ancient Israel. Jesus was gentle with every kind of sinner except one, the religious hypocrite, the person who claimed to speak for God but spoke lies instead. Satan is the god of this world. The Greek word here for world is cosmos. It means a beautifully organized world system. It is not evil itself. But when Adam sinned, Satan became the god of this cosmos, and religion is a key component of Satan's world system. Religion is pride-based. It assumes that man can earn God's acceptance. True faith says you can only be accepted by God through receiving forgiveness on the basis of a God-given substitute bearing the penalty for his sin. The first brothers, Cain and Abel, give us a good picture of this. Abel approached God by God's way. He brought the appointed animal sacrifice as a substitute to die for his sins. Cain, on the other hand, came the way of the world system. He brought the fruit of his own works. Abel was accepted, and Cain was not. God reasoned with Cain, trying to get him to come the true way. But Cain's pride was inflamed. Rather than come by faith in God's provision, he did what religion has been doing ever since. He murdered the one who represented God's truth. Religion hates truth because truth stands as a rebuke to man's self-centered pride. Some of the greatest crimes in history were committed in the name of religion. Cain helped establish the world system that the Bible warns about. That system began with a sad scripture. Cain went out from the presence of the Lord. He established a highly developed society and culture, but he left God out. He built the first city mentioned in the Bible. In the generations that immediately followed, many advancements were made. Jabal was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. Agriculture began to develop and flourish. Jubal was the father of all those who play the lyre and the pipe. Music, art, culture were introduced to take their place in the world system. Then came the development of industry. Tubal-Cain was the forger of all implements of bronze and iron. These things were not evil in themselves, but they did not include God. Man's achievement became a snare to take his heart away from God. Here was an entire civilization organized and developed around the material and the temporal, much like ours. Humanity's proud self-sufficiency, rejection of God's truth, and unrelenting violence permeated the world system. It wasn't until Adam's son Seth had a son named Enosh that it says, "Then men began to call upon the name of the Lord." We are in a battle with the world system, and that battle centers on our affections. When Satan can't reach a person through temptation to do the more obvious gross sins of the flesh, he will switch to such innocent and worthwhile avenues as education, career, nature, or many other pursuits. If he can make anything in the world system first in our affections, taking Christ's place of priority, he has effectively sidetracked us into the web of worldliness. This is why John warns, "Do not love the world, cosmos, nor the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world system, the lust of the flesh, and the lust of the eyes, and the boastful pride of life, is not from the Father, but is from the world system." James said, "Friendship with the world is hostility toward God." Embracing the world and its ways will inevitably drive our affections away from God. There is no neutral ground. This is why John warned, "If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him." This is why so many once great Christian universities today abhor the very name of Jesus. This is why once great denominations now embrace that which is abhorrent to God. It didn't start that way. It started when a desire for acceptance and prestige took precedence over their desire to please God. This is why so many individual Christians have lost their joy, their witness, and their effectiveness. for Christ. They sought the approval and affection of the world first and made Jesus and his kingdom second. This is happening to Christians, churches, and Christian institutions all over the world at the very time when we need to be at our best for God, totally sold out for him. Well, that's it for tonight, folks. God willing, I'll see you next week.
You've been watching the Hal Lindsey Report. To support this program, send your tax-deductible gift to Hal Lindsey Media Ministries, P.O. Box 470-470, Tulsa, Oklahoma 74147. You can also support this ministry online. Visit hallindsey.com or call 1-888-RAPTURE.